Hello friends, welcome back to another video, or if you are new here, welcome. With summer winding down and fall quickly approaching, I thought now would be a good time to take pause and enjoy these slow summer moments before they're gone and replaced with cooler months. So today's video we will be doing just that. Join me today as I slow down and enjoy the simple things. We will be making an amazing strawberry jam to stock up in the pantry for coming months and baking some crusty bread loaves to use as bread bowls for dinner, a much requested recipe from the kids. I also have veggies to pick in the garden, and I'll share little peeks into our homeschool day. Something I like to do each morning after I wake up and get dressed is I like to put on music on our TV in the living room. I feel like a nice jazz or classical music at a lower volume, especially during our school days, is kind of nice just to have as background music. Nothing too distracting or anything like that, but it's nice to have some background noise. I like to keep things very simple on school mornings. So most mornings the boys will have yogurt with some granola. They like oatmeal. Sometimes we'll just do like scrambled eggs and toast. But whatever it is, we keep it very simple on school morning. I like to get up and get moving right away, get right into our curriculum for the day. So usually after everybody gets dressed, has breakfast, and does their chores, we jump right into it for the day. And with mornings like that, it's kind of imperative that breakfast is just very simple. Another thing that I like to do, and I don't think I showed it on my Wednesday nightly routine video, but I like to fill these water bottles up each night before I go to bed for the boys and put them in the fridge so they're nice and cold. That way they're readily available for them to have throughout the day, and I don't have to stop mid-lesson to go and get them a drink, and they also don't really like ask for sugary drinks when these are on hand.
Yep, 14. Day can play.
I'm going to get started on the bread, so it has plenty of time to do a couple rises before I bake it in the oven. I have a couple different loaves of bread that I'm needing to bake this day. One is an Amish milk bread. It is a sweeter sandwich bread loaf that we adore, and we were running pretty low in our pantry, so while I have the oven on, I figured I'd bake that. I don't share that recipe in this video, but I do plan on sharing it in an upcoming video if you're interested in seeing that. The other bread loaf is a crusty bread loaf that we will be separating and making into little bread bowls to have for dinner tonight. This recipe is a little extra and does take some extra time, but it is very easy, and my kids have so much fun with it. I like to make it every now and then. I will have the recipes from today's video down below in the description box if you would like to save them and try them out yourself, but for the bread bowls, I started with putting 2 teaspoons of instant rapid rise yeast into the mixing bowl, and then I usually will just do a sprinkle of sugar, like just a pinch. I don't measure it, and that is not something that's in the recipe, but I always feel like it helps with the yeast. So I put a pinch of sugar into the yeast. You can also use honey if you prefer, and then 1.5 cups of very warm water, and then I let that sit for 10 minutes, let it get nice and frothy, and then once it is, I will put in 3 cups of flour. You can use bread or plain, all-purpose, it doesn't matter which, but I usually will use all-purpose. 2 teaspoons of cooking salt, I usually will also put some oil at the sides of the mixing bowl, like right as it's finishing up mixing. However, I was wanting to put it in this other bowl so I could do the Amish milk bread loaves in my stand mixer. So that is what I was doing there. I had some oil in the bowl and I was forming the dough into a ball and making sure that it's completely coated in the oil so then it doesn't stick to the side of the bowl while it's rising. I like to cover it with a warm towel while it's rising, and then I'm just going to let it rise until it's about doubled in size. The first rise usually takes a couple of hours. I usually allow 2 hours for it to rise the first time. I mentioned in a previous video that I recently made several jars of the best strawberry jam that I have ever had in my life. It is the best jam I've ever had, including from any store-bought or anything like that. So I wanted to include the video of that in today's video. So it obviously is a different day, but this recipe is way too good not to share. I've mentioned a couple of times before how I'm wanting to get into preserving food, so this is kind of where I started. I started with doing salsa and jam, and I guess that's kind of where you're supposed to start anyway. This jam, though, I was shocked at how easy it was and how little ingredients it had, and so and like I said, it is the best. My kids eat it on everything. Instead of syrup on their waffles or pancakes, they eat this jam. And with fall and winter quickly approaching, something I constantly like to have going is fresh bread. So I like to serve it with soups and just as a filler for any meal, especially like if my kids don't love what we're having, I like to have just some fresh bread on the table and serve it with butter and jam. And so to have several of these jars in our pantry that we can have readily available for some fresh bread in the coming months is going to be amazing. Aldi ended up having a sale on strawberries, and they were only about $1 something for each one of these pints. So I ended up getting 3 of the pints, and it worked out perfectly. I needed about 6 cups of strawberries, so that kind of equaled out, give or take some. I was cutting up the strawberries in pretty small pieces so then I can crush them up and add in the sugar. The recipe calls for having it set in the sugar for about an hour to kind of release the juices before you go any further. So that is what I was doing. I'm cutting them up super small so then they will be easier to crush, and then I'll mix in the sugar. I did end up canning these in a water bath. However, I did not show it. There was too much going on, and I was also kind of flustered for it being my very first time canning, so I did not show it. However, again, I will have the full instructions down below in the description box if you're wanting to can this as well. In a large pot, I added 3 cups of sugar to the strawberry pieces, and I'm just doing my best to kind of smash them down. It ended up not really working very well. I mixed it in really good, and then I put it in the fridge to release those juices and have it set for like an hour. So then I went in again after an hour and I started smashing them again. This is 2 tablespoons of bottled lemon juice. The recipe also calls for some sliced Granny Smith apples. I did not put that in, and I thought it was a little odd. So if you know why they said that, please let me know, because it did not specify in the recipe, and I thought that was so weird. So I don't know if it was for something like canning wise or what, but I did not end up adding it, and mine still turned out perfectly. So apparently you don't have to, but I am curious why it was in there in the first place. So anyway, I added the sugar, the lemon, mixed it up, and now it has sat for the last hour in the fridge. I put it in this pot to start heating it up, and after I cooked it for a while, I decided, okay, you know what, I I was thinking that I could smash it in this pot, and that did not end up working out. So I ended up putting them into the blender and pulsing it a couple of times until it was the consistency I wanted, and that worked perfectly. I'm sure an immersion blender will work out perfectly as well. So I would just skip the steps of smashing it, put it straight into the blender or an immersion blender, and it, like I said, will work out perfectly. And then you can kind of get it exactly how you're wanting. Some people like chunks in theirs. I do not, so I did not have that. I had it pretty smooth. So the recipe says to bring it to a boil over medium-high heat, and once it reaches a boil that cannot be stirred down, you're supposed to set a timer for 20 minutes and turn the heat off. So that is what I was doing. I was kind of making sure it was a boil that could not be stirred down, and then you kind of let it sit. Now, I did let it sit longer than 20 minutes, just barely, and I think it actually needs more than that. One way that they were having you test the doneness was to have a plate in the freezer. And at the very beginning, you put it in the freezer at the start of the process. And then to test the doneness, you take it out of the freezer and you put the hot jam onto the plate. And then you put it back into the freezer for 2 minutes. And then you remove the plate and run your finger through the jam. If the line stays separated in your jam, then it's ready to be jarred. If it doesn't and the line closes in, you're supposed to boil the jam for 5 more minutes and then repeat the test, and I guess just kind of keep going from there. So that is how you're supposed to test for doneness. And then once the jam is done, you just ladle the hot jam into your hot jars, and you can proceed with the water bath. So I, again, did not show that here, but I do have a water bath going next to my pot of jam, and I have the jars in there so they can stay hot the entire time, because you put hot liquids and hot vegetables, stuff like that, into hot jars. So to keep them hot, I had them going the whole time so I could put the jam in them right when it was done. Once you have all of the jam ladled into the jars, you can then wipe the rim of the jar to remove any residue. You'll center the canning lid on the jar and adjust the band to just fingertip tight. If you're not going to be putting these in a water bath and you're not canning these, you'll just let the jars cool completely, tighten the bands, and then store in the fridge for up to 2 months. This is the next day. I have some soapy water in the sink, and I am testing to make sure that they all sealed. So I'm not sure if everybody does this, because I know my uncle and stuff, they don't do this, but they leave the rings on their jars, and I thought you were supposed to take the rings off of them so then you can tell if the seal broke. So anyway, I'm curious what you do. I ended up keeping the ring off of them because I'm so paranoid about it. And this being, one of my first times, I was just super paranoid. So I kept the rings off of them and stored them so I can tell if the seal breaks. So anyway, I was just taking the rings off and washing them completely, drying them, and storing them in the pantry for upcoming months. I am so excited to start my whole canning journey. And I'm looking forward to stocking up and having all this readily available for the winter months. Before we head inside and start on the soup for dinner and finishing up our bread bowls, I'm stopping in the garden, filling up my basket, and picking anything that needs to be picked and brought inside. It has been so hot here that our tomatoes kind of had stopped turning red for a while, and we have had like a bunch of green ones. I had some family members that like green tomatoes, so they picked some green tomatoes from the garden, but now it has started cooling down and all of our tomatoes are turning red. So I have a whole bunch of tomatoes to pick. Our okra has really been producing this year. It is awesome. So I have a ton of okra that I already actually picked the day before. And so I don't have as much this day to pick, but then again, another thing that is totally producing is our peppers. So excited about making some pepper jelly. I have a couple of recipes for that. I have not made it before, but we've tried several different of these recipes and they've all been really good. So I do plan on sharing that, and if that is something that you enjoy and you have a recipe for, I would love for you to share it with me. Basically any of the canning recipes, I would just absolutely love to try if you are willing to share. If you are a longtime follower of mine, you probably already know how to make hamburger soup because I have made it so many times on my channel. It is probably one of my kids' favorite soups that I make, and it's so low key. I started it a couple years ago, kind of out of necessity. Financially, it is a really good recipe. Also, if you haven't gone grocery shopping, which is usually my case. So that is kind of how it started, and it is so good that it has stuck around. My kids constantly ask for it. So for this soup, you can pretty much use any of the vegetables and stuff that you have on hand. I am using 2 pounds of ground beef, and I have that going in a big stock pot on the stove. I often don't usually use 2 pounds though. That was kind of a new thing. I usually will just use the one, so if that's all you have, you absolutely can just do the one. And then I am cutting up some onion in whatever size chunks. If your family does not like onion, you can leave it out. But my family, if I do it in small chunks and it's like cooked into the soup, they don't mind it at all. So I'm going to put it in with the ground beef while that's cooking, and then I usually also put in celery. I love celery in soup, but I didn't have any, so I didn't put any in. And it was kind of funny because when I was talking, while I was making this, I was talking to Theo, and we were talking about the different ingredients, and I was like, oh, I don't have celery though. We used up all the celery. And he was like, oh, good. Like, I don't like celery in soups. So that was kind of funny because that was news to me. I did not realize. And I don't even know if he realizes that he's eating it because I put it in quite a bit of things. I really enjoy cooked celery. So anyway, I didn't have it this time, but usually I will put in celery. I'm dicing up some carrots, and again, I'm going to throw that in while the ground beef is cooking. And you could put in mushrooms. I'm sure I probably put in spinach. And you could do like a pasta instead. I always leave the pastas and rice out, and instead I do big chunks of potatoes. And you know what? Whenever I make this, everybody always thinks that it's like a cheeseburger type of soup, and it's not. It's literally just called hamburger soup because we use ground beef in it. And that was just, like I said, it was formed out of necessity, and it stuck. And that is my kids. Yes, it's summer, but my kids, they're still asking for me to make this soup even throughout summer. And we were sitting at the dinner table, and my husband, he works in the heat. He works on job sites, and so he is in the heat all day long. And then he came home, and we were having some hamburger soup in our bread bowls, and something that the kids begged for, and were super excited about. And he's just like, oh, okay. I'm like sweating eating dinner after I've been sweating all day on the job. So it is odd to be eating soup, but you know that it's such a good recipe when all 4 of your kids are repeatedly asking for you to make this. This is also something that I love having simmering on the stove throughout winter time and fall. It's so perfect because you can use whatever you have on hand. You can use frozen vegetables as well. But this is a good meal to throw everything together, like in the morning or whenever you have a moment in the afternoon, and then let it simmer all day until, my kids often, like while I'm cooking it, they'll dig in as soon as the potatoes are done, because that's generally when the entire soup is done. So I will catch my daughter. She is 14. I'll catch her like kind of sneaking small bowls before we have dinner or before we actually like eat this meal. And it's nice because they can do that. So I often during winter months when we're at home homeschooling, I will start a big pot of this on the stove and then in the morning. And then if they want a bowl of this for lunch, they can have that. It is done. And then, we can also eat it for dinner. My kids love it that much. So I did not have enough broth, so I went ahead and I'm adding 2 beef bouillon cubes. And then I believe I do 6 cups of water. This recipe is not really a recipe. It is just whatever you have and however much you want. We like it pretty brothy, so I usually do about 6 cups of water if I'm using the bouillon cubes, or I will do the 6 cups of broth. I think I've even done it like as much as 8 cups. Really, I just kind of fill it up because we like a lot of broth. My kids, they love it, so I'm using the broth that I have, and then the rest is going to be water. Little bit of an interesting fact, and I don't know if other people are like this or if we're just weird. I don't know. You can let me know. But my kids love chicken broth, and I like to make big pots of the chicken broth, and then I store it in mason jars in our fridge so I can have it for recipes and, odds and ends. However, my kids love it, and they will like drink it warm in a mug, and that's often why I don't have it, because I will boil a bunch of chicken or vegetables. I like doing a vegetable broth as well, but I will usually make one of those and I will do a huge batch of it, and my kids will still go through like that huge batch because they can literally just sit there and drink it out of coffee mugs. The soup is simmering and the bread is ready for it to be cut up into pieces. So I am getting it out of the bowl and doing some folds. I'm getting all the air bubbles out, and that's why you're kind of seeing me push into it with my fingers. I'm trying to decide because I usually will do like 6, 1 for each person, and I was trying to decide how to evenly do that, and I got them pretty much even for the most part. However, I also kind of left, like, my husband, I gave him a larger one, and then my two older teens, I gave them larger ones. Theo and Lincoln, they don't eat very much. They're still very little, so they were given like smaller little bowls, and I am just rolling these, getting again all the air out and tucking them so the seal is at the bottom, forming them into little dough balls. And then I'm going to put them in the center of several pieces of parchment paper. So I usually will do this. This is the loaf that I do where it's like one big one. However, because we're doing bread bowls, I'm doing a bunch of little small ones. And it works better when, especially for this quantity, I'm doing 6. If you had like 4, that would be ideal for one Dutch oven, but I wasn't thinking, and I used my other one to make the soup in. So I am going to fit them all into the other Dutch oven that I have. So anyway, if you have this quantity, I do suggest doing it in 2 different ones. That way they kind of form and look really pretty. But if you don't care, I mean, I don't care. And so some of them were a little lopsided because I had to shove them all into this one pan. So I'm taking the Dutch oven out of the oven. It was set for 450, lid on. I'm taking that off, and I'm going to put each dough ball into the center of a piece of parchment paper, and then I kind of gathered them all and put them into this pot, and I'm trying to kind of just mess with them, make sure that they're in there somewhat evenly, they're not on top of each other, and they all kind of have room. It did end up working out, but they just weren't as pretty. And so if that matters to you, separate them into 2 Dutch ovens, or if you have 4, it works perfectly in 4 little bread bowls. It works perfectly in 1. Anything over that, I would probably do a little bit more, but this is how they turned out. Once they were done, I cut off the top and scooped out the insides, and then we put some soup inside, and like I said, the kids absolutely loved it. It was kind of one of those little fun meals, and there's a lot that goes into it, but it is well worth it in the end. But anyway, that is all I have for you today. Thank you so much for joining me in another video. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.